Hi, 8th graders. Welcome back. Today we're reviewing Unit 2 content, Antebellum period through Reconstruction. Our goals today are to describe Louisiana in the Antebellum, Civil War, and Reconstruction periods. So just a disclaimer, we're going to be covering a lot of content and time in today's lesson. So before we get started, let's just kind of remember what we've already learned. We know that the French came across the Atlantic Ocean and established a colony in Louisiana. We know that they wanted the area where New Orleans is because New Orleans is located at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And this river was really important for trade, both up and down the interior of the United States, as well as trade with other countries. It could go out the Gulf of Mexico into the Atlantic and trade anywhere in the world. We know that Louisiana started as a French colony, and then after a while, because of the French and Indian War, France secretly traded it to the Spanish. The Spanish kept it for a while until 1800 when the French bought it back from them. But almost immediately after the French bought it, they sold it to America. So it became an American territory for a while. That just meant that it was owned by America, but it wasn't a state. And then eventually it wrote a state constitution and became a state. We know that all of these countries really enjoyed having Louisiana, particularly because New Orleans was located right at the mouth of the Mississippi River, and that was great for trade. So first we're going to talk about the antebellum period. In case you don't know, antebellum just means the time period before the Civil War. And so people remember the antebellum period one of two ways, and I think this shows a lot of issues we have in our country today. So some people think of antebellum and they think of beautiful plantations and gorgeous dresses, young Southern belles. Think of like Gone with the Wind if you've ever seen it. So that's one way to think about the antebellum period, but another way, and probably a little bit more of an honest way, is to think about this period as a time when slavery really expanded in the United States. And so more people were enslaved, brutally treated, and we know that the conditions of people who were enslaved were really bad. This is a man who had been beaten, and these are some of the devices used to punish or restrain enslaved people. So during the antebellum period, Louisiana became a major center for trade and slavery. And there were two main reasons why this happened. One, the invention of the steamboat made it even easier for people to trade up and down the Mississippi River. And two, the invention of the cotton gin made it easier to clean cotton quickly. And so this increased the demand for cotton and enslaved people's labor to pick the cotton. So we've got two things happening, and these two things are compounding to increase the need for slavery. One, it's now easier to trade because the steamboat has been invented. And two, the cotton gin has made it easier to clean cotton. And so now it's easier to produce cotton fabric. And so now more people are wanting cotton. So this period, King Cotton became a common phrase because it kind of ruled the South. So here's what a steamboat looks like. This little paddle right here is fueled by steam. That's where it gets its name. Steamboats can go in rivers. They cannot go in the ocean. So a steamboat could go up and down the interior of the United States, which we see from this. This is a New Orleans, which was a steamboat. You see how it goes up and down the interior of the United States. It cannot go into the Gulf of Mexico. It would just crash and sink. And this is how a cotton gin works. So cotton is a plant, and when you pick it, it has a lot of seeds in it. Previously, people were picking those seeds out by hand, but now you see, running it this way, the seeds are popping out on this end, and the clean cotton is going out on that end. So now that it's so much faster to clean cotton, plantation owners were able to grow more cotton. So this increased the demand for enslaved people to grow that cotton for them. And we see after the cotton gin and the steamboat, the demand and the amount of cotton, the supply of cotton grown, dramatically increases. And this increases the need for enslaved people. And so what we're seeing here is this is the southern part of the United States. Here's Louisiana right here. There's New Orleans. The darker an area is, the more enslaved people there were. Notice how dark it is along the Mississippi River right here. And that's because people were building their plantations along the river because it was easier for trade. So that's the antebellum period, and that leads to the Civil War. We talk a lot about slavery during the antebellum period because historians believe that slavery played a really big role in why Southern states decided to secede or leave the Union. So, due to sectional differences and the South's desire to maintain slavery, the Civil War broke out. Louisiana separated or seceded from the United States and they joined a new country known as the Confederacy. So let's talk a minute about those sectional differences. Here we're seeing the South had half as many people as the North. The South had twice as much farm acreage than the North. The value of farmland, well, actually, it's not as important, but let's look at like railroad mileage. The North had a lot more railroads. The North had a ton more factories and a ton more workers working in factories. So we're seeing two very different sections or these sectional differences of the South and the North. The South is very agrarian, meaning very agricultural, lots of farming, not very industrialized, whereas the North is the complete opposite. It has factories and not a lot of farms. The North does not need enslaved people to work on these factories, and so people in the North are beginning to question the institution of slavery because they don't need it, and they're like looking at the South and seeing that it's pretty cruel. Um, so after Lincoln is elected in 1860, Southern states begin to worry that that Lincoln is going to outlaw slavery. In order to protect slavery in the South, Southern states choose to secede. And again, to secede or secession means to remove a state from a country. So states like South Carolina and Louisiana said, rather than risk losing enslaved people, I'm going to leave the country and make my own country. Now, some people will try to tell you that the cause of the Civil War was not related to slavery, and my personal opinion is that that's wrong. It was definitely related to slavery, and if we're looking at a map like this is helping to prove that point. So this map is showing the darker the red, the more enslaved people were located in that area. Notice how the northern part of the United States really didn't have enslaved people at the time the Civil War broke out, whereas the southern states, it's incredibly prominent in those states. So here in yellow are the states that seceded or left to join the Confederacy. And notice those are also the same states that had a really high enslaved people population. So in the Civil War, it's two sides. It's the Union, and that's just the United States of America, and they're fighting against the South. The South is fighting to become its own country. The North is fighting to restore the country, to get all the states back in it. This is the Union. This is the Confederacy. So in the Civil War, the Union followed a strategy known as the Anaconda Plan. An anaconda is a big giant snake, and the way that it gets its food is it wraps itself around an animal and squeezes until it's dead. The Union strategy was also to wrap around the South and squeeze it until it was dead. So they would surround the South by ocean ports and along the Mississippi River to cut off all of their trade routes. We know the South is not very industrialized, and so their goal is to sell all of their cotton in order to buy manufactured goods like guns. And so the North is saying, let's just stop them from trading anything. So as a result, New Orleans was a really early target because we know that New Orleans controls that mouth of the Mississippi River. New Orleans is attacked by the Union very early, and it falls and is under Union control for most of the Civil War. So again, we have the Union, that's America. We have the Confederacy, that's the South. New Orleans was an important target because it controlled all of this trade, and so that's going to help that Anaconda Plan if they capture New Orleans really quickly. So after New Orleans was captured, a man named Benjamin Butler, he was a Union general, so someone from the North, he came in to control Louisiana. People in Louisiana did not like him because people in Louisiana are from the South and they did not want to be controlled by the North. So they treated him pretty badly. Like here is a picture of a chamber pot. A chamber pot is like an old school toilet where they put his face at the bottom of the chamber pot. He was object of ridicule by a lot of people. Like here's a cartoon that's not very flattering of him. But Benjamin Butler helped maintain order and peace in New Orleans during the time when New Orleans was occupied. At the end of the war, New Orleans was fine. There had not been a lot of fighting in the area, and he had kept the place relatively peaceful and stable during the war. And so finally, we're going to talk about Reconstruction. So we talked about antebellum, the time period before the Civil War. Then we talked about the Civil War. Reconstruction is the time after the Civil War. After the Union won the Civil War, the country entered a period of Reconstruction, where both President Lincoln and President Johnson tried to reunite the country as quickly as possible. So their main goals with this are get all of the states back into the country and start rebuilding new lives for formerly enslaved people. Reconstruction had some successes. For example, slavery was ended, and formerly enslaved people were given citizenship. And also rights along with that, like the right to vote and the right to never be enslaved again. This man, PBS Pinchback, he's got kind of a silly name, but he was the first black governor of America, and he was a black governor in Louisiana. So that was a success to have black citizens in America starting to gain rights and hold political offices. These are the three big amendments that you guys learned about that come out of the Reconstruction era. 13th makes it illegal to enslave people. The 14th says that you cannot take away the rights of a citizen, including those who had just previously been enslaved. And the 15th says that all men can vote. However, Reconstruction had a lot of failures, and we see the effects of those failures still today. So for a long while after Reconstruction ended, something called poll taxes and literacy tests were used in order to determine if a person could vote. Now, they said that the poll tax was just, a small tax you pay to vote. However, formerly enslaved people were still trying to get their get on their feet and figure out like careers and jobs. So they didn't have extra money to pay. And then even when they did, they were given literacy tests. And we're going to see those literacy tests were actually really unfair and difficult to pass. And so the actual goal of these by Southern states was to limit Black citizens' ability to vote. Black codes were created to restrict the rights of Black citizens in the South. And so things like segregated buildings or even like segregated facilities like bathrooms were created under these Black codes, also known as Jim Crow laws. And then racist groups like the KKK also became popular. Here's an example of a Black code in Louisiana. It says no Negro or freedman shall be permitted or allowed to rent a house within the limits of the town under any circumstances. So things like limiting where people can live or whether or not Black people could be outside after dark limited the freedoms of Black Americans. Here's an example of a literacy test. And so let's see if this thing is fair. So the first one says draw a line around the number or letter of the sentence. Does anyone know what that means? Like is drawing a line a circle or is it like a U or is it just a line? Because it says a line around. It's a little tricky. And when I look at the directions, it says, do what you are told in each statement, nothing more, nothing less. Be careful as one wrong answer denotes failure of the test. I could get this question wrong because I don't know what they mean. They're not being clear about what a line around the number or letter of the sentence means. And then let's look at number 5. Circle the first letter of the alphabet in this line. I have no idea what that's saying. As a college educated person, I would still get this question wrong just because it's not clear. These literacy tests were intended to make Black people fail so that they could restrict Black voting rights. And so this timeline is just showing us the major events. We see shortly after Lincoln is elected president, states begin seceding. During the Civil War, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation to free enslaved people. That helps turn the tide of the war in the Union's favor. And we see now that the war is over, things like the KKK are being formed, while more amendments are being passed to give rights. So there was like a push and pull of giving and taking away rights of Black Americans. All right, y'all have a great day.